So hi everyone, and welcome to this virtual session. Just as a reminder, you don't have to stay in this session the whole time. You can ask your question, or you can listen to some questions, and then you can go to a different one. So this is kind of like if we were doing the conference, different tables we would have set up with staff at each table, so you could float around the room and ask your questions. So don't feel like you have to stay here. And we can just answer your questions as they come in, and we'll try our best to answer them. And if we can't answer them, we'll take notes and make sure that we can give a response in the question and answers that we post on our website later. My name is Samantha Carvalho, and I'm the director of the Office of Community Housing Development, and we're responsible for all of the HUD financing that goes into these deals. If you are applying just for tax credits, there's often a lot of overlap between what the federal requirements are with the HUD funding and what we're also requiring through the state tax credits. And so with me, I have Sean Walker, who is our manager of federal compliance, and Joanna Jin and Adam Graham, who are environmental specialists. They will be reviewing the environmental reviews and making sure you're in compliance with that. And then Sanjana, who's a tax credit specialist, who's very familiar with these programs and is going to be very is leading a team of this for the scoring round for the low-income housing tax credit applications that we're getting in. Since we have kind of a small group, I think maybe now would be a good time for you to just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your questions, and mute yourself when you're done, so it's less noisy. This group is to talk about questions you have about environmental reviews, which may also be historic preservation requirements or floodplain management or whatever might be related to environmental reviews. Another topic might be lead paint, asbestos. And then we can also talk about Davis-Bacon requirements, Section 3, minority and women-owned business requirements. We have another session for relocation, but if you have a question about relocation, we can handle that here too. So just please open up your, go ahead.
So I have to use the phone.
Oh, okay. So Joanna, thank you for calling it in. Does anyone want to get started with your question, or do you need some more information from us?
Hi, this is Allie Watson. I have a question we're actually applying for 9% tax credits this year when we've applied previously for the project. So last year we applied for 9% in the general set aside. My question is we're updating all of our third-party reports because I know that they need to be within 6 months of application. But one of the third-party reports that we got for the ESA was that we needed to do long-term radon testing, which we got done. And that was done back in November of last year. And then also we had a noise assessment done back in May of last year. So my question for those are, do those also need to be updated? So for like the long-term radon testing, we got that done. We got a mitigation report for it, and we're planning on applying that to our renovation. So I guess, does that radon testing need to be redone if we're planning on applying that mitigation to the property? And then also on the noise assessment, does that also have to be redone since it's a current project that we're renovating?
Mm-hmm. Allie, did you submit this question in the Q&A too? Like, did you write this question out? Because I think we have a good response for you for that, if that's, I remember reading.
Yes, I did. I think I did write it out, but I hadn't received anything or seen anything.
Yeah. Joanna, do you want to cover what you put in your response when we were covering those questions just internally about the radon and noise question?
Yes, Alex, I can answer this question. For noise, yes, for noise retest, if site plan has changed and the new subject property is within like 5 miles of a civil airport, or within 15 miles of military airport, and 1,000 feet of a major roadway, and 3,000 feet of a railroad. If you're in a new site plan project within this area, then yes, you need to do the noise retest.
Credit underwriting
If some-
report, the final credit underwriting report is dated the 29th.
Hold on a second, let me mute whoever's.
Okay, can you hear? I haven't finished. If the site plan has not been changed yet, the previous noise assessment was conducted within 180 days, or we say 6 months prior application submission. A noise assessment is not required if it's within 180 days, your previous assessment. If it's more than 1 year old, then a new noise assessment is required. And for redone, the buildings must be tested for redone upon completion of construction. Is it clear? Is any question?
No, that's great. But just to confirm, I get, because you were saying about the noise assessment, that the site plan's the same, but the report will be more than 180 days old. So we do need to get that retested then, is how I understand that.
Yeah, if it's
Okay.
more than, actually, if it's more than 1 year old. If it's more
Okay.
than 1 year old, yeah, you need to redo the noise assessment.
And is that going to be more than 1 year old as of the date of application? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So what exactly was the 180 days referring to?
Okay, so then you have to redo the noise test.
No, I think her question is 180 days is related to site plan changes, correct? If there's no site plan changes, a year-old noise assessment's okay, but if there are site plan changes, then 180 days.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, there are two conditions you need to require it to do the retest. So one is if the site plan has been changed and your the proposed site is within the certain miles that I mentioned. Then another condition is if the site plan is not changed, but your previous one is already old, like more than 1 year, then the noise assessment should be redo it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Does anyone else have a question they want to ask? You can also drop your question in the chat too. If you need to run to another session, you're welcome to do that. But you can also unmute yourself and ask your question too if you like.
Sam, I heard Scott, the beginning, he mentioned that any environment new has been changed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure he's here. Scott, are you here? Or I can tell, everyone participated here.
Yeah, please give us an update on that.
Yeah, generally there's no major changes, but okay. I think there's regarding the HPD review, there are some kind of changes. I remember some consultant or developer, send an email to me say why HPD is pending the review. So the thing is like this: for 9%, 4% competitive round projects, the SHPO documentation is still required to submit it prior to application submission. However, HPD will start 30 days period review after being notified of projects awarded list from DCA.
Okay, I'm gonna clarify that, because just to make sure people are familiar with the acronyms we're talking about. We have a historic preservation review. So the State Historic Preservation Office reviews your historic preservation documents. Because we get more 9% tax credit applications than we fund about 50% of the applications we receive, sometimes less than that. So to reduce the burden on our State Historic Preservation Office of having to review all of the application documents when the likelihood that they'll be funded is less than or 50%. What we've decided to do with SHPO to cut down their workload is to notify them when we're going to make an award so that they know that they can go ahead and proceed to reviewing those. And that's a timetable that you don't have to worry about, because there should be plenty of time between when we make an award and the 30 or 60 day or maybe sometimes 90-day time frame for SHPO to review your documentation, give you an assessment of what you might need to mitigate anything, then work with you on your mitigation plan. All of that can happen between when we award your credits and when we finally finalize everything with you. And so that's just to know that you can submit that stuff to SHPO whenever you want to, but we will let them know that your application is in process. And then once we know what we're awarding and we make that public, then SHPO will go ahead and look at it. I wanted to read out a question real quick that we got that says, does having wetlands on the property exclude one from applying for tax credits or home funds? So can you talk about wetlands on properties and what they need to do? Joanna? I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you're still, I think you're frozen up again. You may have to call it in.
I can answer the question. Yeah, no. Oh, Joanna's back.
Okay, it's like on and off. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So Sam, you question about the wetland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have to emphasize here regarding the wetlands. Some developer asking, say, if our proposed site is not going to impact the wetland, do we still do kind of maybe mitigation things? The requirement is this: if your consultant has not identified any negative impact to wetland, but the wetland is located, even though it's located off, or for example, adjacent property nearby, as long as this is within the property line, even though there's no impact, the site drainage plan and permanent covenant must be in place prior to the closing to preserve the wetland according to HUD regulations requirement.
And Sam, may I expand upon that? And to answer the question, having a wetland on property does not preclude the developer from applying for tax credits or home funds.
Yeah, I would add to that we can also discuss your options too, if you need some advice about that, because depending on the wetland situation, whether it's a small piece of the property that has wetlands, there's a lot of other factors to take into consideration, as you all know. For those of you who might have just joined, didn't join when we started, I just want to remind you of what we're doing here. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question if you like, or you can put it in the chat and we can address it. And you're welcome to go in and out of sessions as you need to, so you can talk to everyone on our team at DCA. So please feel free to unmute yourself or ask your question in the chat. I'll also add that we are fielding questions for environmental reviews, Davis-Bacon, Section 3, any of the other federal requirements that you have questions about. We have other panels for some of them, but if you have a question related to relocation, minority and women-owned businesses, we can also field those questions too. So while we're waiting for people to ask questions, Sanjana or Joanna, do you have any advice that you'd like to share about scoring or environmental reviews or anything like that that you think might be helpful to the group to hear?
Sam, I would like to emphasize one thing here to everybody, about the tribal consultation regarding the home funded project. DCA will forward the documentation to the tribal related, not the consultant and housing agencies or etc. So only DCA send the consultation letter to the tribes. Okay, I have to emphasize here because we experienced like one or two projects. The consultant sent directly letter to the tribes, but HUD do not allow this to do so because it's between government to government to official consultation process.
Yeah, and I'll also say that what happens is if you all take the steps to go ahead and notify the tribes to do the tribal consultation, we're just going to have to go and do it over again for the same project because that's what HUD requires us to do. So you'd be saving yourself time not sending the letters and letting us do it.
I just want to add like a few things. We don't have that many like major changes from last year's manual, so I guess all the requirements are pretty much the same. But if you have any confusions regarding any of the requirements, minimum documents, anything, just reach out to us before the application is submitted so that we can clarify it. Because if anything is missing in the application submission, then that might lead to like point deduction or that would be counted as the incomplete application. So we want to avoid that. So just if you have any confusion, just contact us beforehand.
Are there any other questions from the group? I have another comment that would help DCA staff with reviewing it. Please ask your environmental consultants to follow the format that we ask for in the manual as far as where to put each section and how to label it, because these documents, the environmental review records, are really long, and it helps our scoring team if they can go straight to the section they're working on. Often the applications we get in are great and everyone puts everything in the format that is helpful to us, but I just wanted to say that if you could just take a look at that and make sure. We'll look at it anyway, but it would be really helpful if we could have it in the format that's familiar to our scoring team so we can process it more easily. Any other questions from the group? Okay. Well, it doesn't seem like if you all don't have any specific questions.
This is Joanna.
Okay.
Connected again.
Okay. Hey, Joanna, sorry you're having connectivity issues with this today. Does anyone have any questions specifically about specific sections of the manual? Like, I know we've recently done some revisions to lead paint from the previous year. We've had some questions about that. Wetlands is always confusing for folks. There's a lot of rules related to that that can trip people up, and noise. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that often have issues because they're a complicated requirement. Historic preservation, for sure. And again, this isn't just about environmental reviews, although we get a lot of questions about environmental reviews. We can also answer questions about Davis-Bacon and other federal requirements too.
Hey, this is Joanna. Sorry, I disconnected again, but I'm on the phone.
Okay, thanks.
One more thing need to emphasize here. Some developers say, hey, can we start construction while we are consulting with the sheeple or tribal? My answer is it is case by case, but generally no physical activities may take place prior to completion of Section 106 review and a GPA review, okay? Especially for Section 106, for home projects, intentional destruction of a historic property called anticipatory demolishing and failure to allow the ACHP to comment on the effects of undertaking are both violations of 24 CFR part, which could prevent HUD from approving an environmental certification or request of funding. Okay, so yeah, this is very important that I need to emphasize here.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. And I also wanted to say too that when we say Section 106 or GPA historic preservation reviews and resolution of that, sometimes the resolution of what you're doing, whatever the action might be to mitigate a historic impact, it might be a survey or something. Sometimes that can be done while you're under construction. It's really case by case. Obviously, if you demolish historic property, that's a problem before you get permission to do so from us or from SHPO. But there are a number of other things that are often asked for where our State Historic Preservation Office has asked for photos or other things. And that can be done while you're getting your site prepped and all the other things that you might need to do. So it is important to clarify with us what may or may not be permitted, because we don't want to be put in a situation where we have to withhold the federal funds, for example, because there was confusion about what could and couldn't happen on site. I have an example of a project that wasn't a large multifamily deal like one of these LIHTC deals. It was a single family home that was developed in a city that received our CHIP grant for HUD funds. And they poured the foundation before they were finished with environmental reviews. And then we weren't able to use the financing on it, even though there wasn't anything environmentally impacted. So it was a real shame that we weren't allowed to help them with that project, but I'm using that example to reiterate that we really are tied to the federal requirements and HUD takes that really seriously. In fact, in that one case with that city, I did ask for HUD headquarters to weigh in on it, and they said, no, sorry, we have to withhold funding. So they poured foundations on projects we couldn't then end up building on, unfortunately. So there is sometimes things that we can't control when it comes to the regulations that HUD puts on us. Now, of course, that's just for the federal funds. For the JEPA reviews, which aren't tied to the federal funds, you know, we still have some requirements that are required by SHPO just at the state level that they're going to want to make sure that it can weigh in on, especially with the demolition of historic property. So I wanted to see so the schedule here says that we have you until 12:30 when we can go back to the other main session. Of course, you all are welcome to attend other sessions, but we would like to, you know, see if you have any other questions we can answer between now and 12:30 or take a break. And for anybody new who's joined, you can ask your question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask the question because we have a small group. I know that we have a number of people here. I recognize your names that are from the environmental consulting firms that work with us. Do you have any advice that you would like to share with the group about the work that you do in getting these documents together for us for the applications? It might be helpful to get your perspective on things too, if we don't have any of the questions from the group, especially because it's helpful for us staff to hear from you about what's working and what's not working from your end.
Hey, Sam, I saw that someone has a question on the chat. Michael Sharon. He asked, does having wetlands on the property exclude one from applying for tax credit or home funds?
Mm-hmm.
I think generally DCA do not funding for property who has negative impact to wetlands, but there's a mitigation. You can request U.S. Corporate Engineer, U.S. Army Corporate Engineer approval. So that's what DCA requirement, one of the requirement. If your proposed development is going to impact the wetland or suspect it may be impact the wetland, then DCA requirement is you get approval permit from U.S. Army Corporate Engineer.
Thanks, Joanna.
So, yeah, if there's no negative impact, then it will be fine.
Okay. Okay, so we have another half an hour left before the end of this session. I'm not sure if any of you all would like to ask any more questions related to Davis-Bacon or Section 3 or minority and women-owned businesses. We also could answer any question about historic preservation. I think I got word too that the environmental manual has been posted. Let me see if that's right.
I'm on the website now, and it is still not on the main DCA website, the
Okay, thank you.
2022 manual.
Did we say in the earlier session we would have it posted on Friday?
I need to take my statement back because I just hit reload. It is there along with the architectural manual, the other compliance manuals, and the market study manual. Those are all up now for 2022.
Okay. Well, since we don't have any questions, I might just kind of pivot to pulling that manual up. And we can go through some of it. That might be helpful to anybody. Just to check that anything new that's in there. Would that be good for you all? Is that something that DCA staff are okay with? I know that's not what we had planned on doing, but it might be a good use of our time here. Any objections?
No, I think that would be fine.
Okay, I'll pull it up. Alrighty. Make sure I can make this big enough for everybody to see. I'll put a section in of changes, like a red line version.
No, we haven't posted the red line version yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then maybe it would be best just to wait and let you all look at that when we have it up.
I just want to make a comment on the noise waiver form. So if you are confused about what that is, like ideally we would like all the applications like new and rehab, all like if the noise is over the hard limit of 65 decibel for outside or 45 decibel for inside, we would like to have that mitigated. But for rehab projects, like if that is not financially feasible, then you can apply for a noise waiver, and that form is available on the website.
Thank you, Shantana. That's really helpful information. And in looking at the questions and answers that were submitted, the questions that were submitted in our forum where we asked for questions, there really was only one question regarding under the topic of environmental, which we addressed earlier about when to retest for noise and radon. And I'll cover that when we sum up in the general session if you all weren't here for that question that was asked at the beginning. I'm also going through the questions that were to see if there's any related to any of the labor standards or employment, but there aren't any. Does anyone have any advice for us about doing this process in the future that might be more helpful to you as far as, you know, how the manual is set up or our forms or anything like that that you want to share with us? Okay, so we have a question here that says, is there something special that needs to be addressed if the immediate surrounding land or structure is deemed a historical area? Does anyone want to address that?
Like you obviously you have to submit the form to the environmental review form to the HPD where they will evaluate like what to do about that historic property that is nearby or adjacent. So if it is like a historic property more than 50 years old and it is like listed on the national register, I always forget that name.
Yeah, historic registry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, HPD might recommend to like make some adjustment to your site plan or do some kind of mitigation, but that's up to HPD. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to do anything specific other than like submitting the form to HPD and then they will tell you what the next steps are.
And I'll give you an example too, is a lot of times what'll be the concern is that the structure you're building doesn't fit the size or scale of the surrounding area. So you might have buildings that are 1-story or 2-story and you're building something that's taller. And so they may recommend that you do tree planting or something else to break it up. Or they'll ask you to take photos and there's rules about how to take those photos so that they can be put in an archive at the local library or wherever so people could see what it looked like before. Are there any other examples you can think of things that the State Historic Preservation Office requires usually when we do it? In my experience, there seldom do they say you can't do what you're planning to do. They just sometimes have a couple of things they want to do in addition to.
Yes, Sam, and also when you reference the site height, it also affects the overall view of an additional historical property. So they may have them scale back the height of the property. So as Sajana was indicating, the best path forward would be to not do anything until you get the information back from historical. And if there is an adverse effect, then the mitigation plan will be put in place, which will then provide you with the direction you should take.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, if this is Joanna, if your project has an adverse effect or significant impact, require more steps in the process, which may involve additional time and money within the overall project schedule. So the review process will continue and instruction related to next steps will be provided to developer in HPD's response letter. So it's a kind of, there's a more detailed mitigation measures you as an owner, developer or consultant should be discussed between HPD and you.
But I just want to remind one thing, like you have to follow up with HPD regarding that historic property. Like we are not responsible for following up on that property or your application. So you have to do the due diligence with the HPD regarding the history preservation form.
And by the way, I have to mention here, MOA, according to HPD, they said the MOA is required for Section 106 review, because that's for federal funded projects. For GPA review, MOA may be not required. It's optional. And because for GPA review, according to HPD, said there's certain mitigation can resolve the significant impact.
I'm going to go ahead and add the link to the environmental manual right now. It's in our list of documents for the QAP, but just so you have it, I'll drop it in the chat right now so you can start looking at it. And maybe that might help if you want to review it. I know it's a very long document. And you can't do that in the 15 minutes or so that we have, but if you'd like to just scan it really quick and take a look at a specific thing you're interested in, this might be a helpful way to do it. So let me go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, so I'm just going to drop the whole link. This leads you to the page that has the waiver forms and the manuals and other things that you'll need to do this environmental process. So that's in there now. Are there any tips on lead testing, lead-based paint testing, or lead water pipe testing that you all want to share? I know that's something that does come up sometimes when we're reviewing these. Does anyone have any advice about that they want to share? Joanna or Sanjana?
Lead, we have, like, our manual says they have to do lead risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
If there is, like, if the structure is older than 1978, then they have to do a complete lead risk assessment. There is a difference between lead inspection and lead risk assessment, and our requirement is the risk assessment. So, and it has to be done by a certified lead professional. But if the structure is vacant, and it will be vacant until, and it will be demolished, then that lead risk assessment is not required. But you have to make sure, like, there's no lead-based paint chips or anything on the soil after it is demolished. But it is not vacant, then, and lead-based paint was found on the property, then you have to also do a lead in soil testing according to EPD requirement. Yeah, and that's all I can think of right now. And for water, lead in drinking water, you have to either do a visual test of all the plumbings and everything, or if you think, like, if you say you are going to change all the plumbing lines replace all the plumbing lines, then that test is not required. But if you are not changing it, then you have to do the test.
Yeah, thanks for that information.
I also want to talk a little bit on the wetland section, like wetland and state water. Just to clear, like sometimes there's wet state water on the property, but there's no wetland. And we also like state water is also a kind of wetland. So we put the fund like there are some funding conditions associated with both wetlands and state water. So even though there is no like water body on the property, but there's like a stream, so we will put both funding conditions for wetland and state water. So sometimes developers come back to us like there is no wetland on the property, but a state water is also considered wetland, and you have to meet certain conditions, like you have to have a site drainage plan and permanent covenant in place, as Joanna mentioned earlier. And if the proposed development is going to impact the wetland or the state water, then you have to have permission from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And also, if the buffer of the state water is going to be impacted, then you need a permission from the local issuance authority, like whoever the local authority is, for a buffer variance. But yeah, I mean, these are all written very clearly in our manual, but for some reason the developers still get confused. I don't blame them. This is a very complicated process. So yeah, I mean, I told earlier also, if you have any kind of confusion regarding any of the requirements, just email us or contact us. Would be happy to help you before the application is even submitted.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to repeat something that you said, because I thought it's important. It comes up a lot, which is where you might have a small creek or stream on the property. And whether that's a state water or wetlands, I mean, it can be very confusing, the definitions of that, but we treat it the same, right? We treat it as though there's a wetlands, a state waters, and that does require, if they're going to be disturbing that, that there's a site plan or drainage plan, erosion controls during construction, but also they may have to get permission from the Corps of Engineers or the local authority, or get permission to do that work. And then if you're affecting the buffer for that local area, if there is a stream buffer in there, however that big that is, you might have to get permission from the local authority or get a buffer variance. Does that kind of cover it? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we end up going back and forth a lot on those issues.
Mm.
Joanna, were you going to add something else to that?
Yeah, I think that we covered most of them. Oh, yeah, repeatedly.
Oh, it looks like Stephen Barrett also put up the manual too, so that's great. That was nice of him to join in. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, good.
Well, we got
a while ago, Sam,
Mhm.
I have another, so I may share with everybody. A while ago, I received a developer questions about lead-based paint. She asked, lead-based paint testing samples required for housing only or not? The answer is it doesn't matter whether the building's original use was for housing or commercial use. If it's going to be demolished, either way, testing soil is still required. For non-residential structures or facilities, cleanup of lead-based paint contaminated soil must be conducted in such a manner to meet the cleanup requirements in the Georgia rules for hazardous waste management, which is called Chapter 391 through 11, and Georgia rules for hazardous site response. Okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful. If anyone had trouble hearing Joanna, this is related to a question we received in writing before this about lead-based paint, whether the use of the building was commercial or residential. And for us, the original use is not the issue. If you're going to demolish it, what the issue is for us is that you've removed the lead paint from the soil. So you have to do soil testing regardless of whether the original use was residential or non-residential, because it will become residential. And then also you have to follow the Georgia rules for hazardous waste management when you remove the soil or remove the materials and demolish the building.
Mhm.
Okay, so since we have 10 minutes left, I did want to give you an opportunity to ask any additional questions you have. You are welcome to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. And if not, then we can take a break now, because the next session where we all rejoin will be starting at 12:30. Do I have that right? Let me make sure I have that right. No, we do have a break. Okay, so it starts at 12:45. So we can keep going for the next 10 minutes and then we'll do our break. And then the all attendees discussion is starting. So I'm going to put a link to that in this chat so you know where to go next after this session wraps up at 12:45.
The break is starting 12:30 to 12:45.
Yeah.
You can go to all attendees discussion starting 12:45.
Any other questions in the last few minutes that we have left with you all? Or any recommendations or suggestions or anything else that you'd like to share with us that would be helpful during the session?
While we're waiting, we can also discuss another issue that have come up a few times, like there's you are developing a large lot but in phases. So you are doing phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or it could be a scattered site too. But mainly for like if you're subdividing a large lot and there's like wetland or state water on the property, you are not developing that portion yet, but that wetland is on your property, then those like permanent covenant and erosion and sedimentation control, all those conditions still apply to that wetland.
So you're saying that, let's say you're applying right now, you're gonna do phase 1, but the entire site plan is bigger. So in phase 2, they're gonna affect the wetland.
If the legal description says, like the legal description describes the whole site, the large lot, but you are only developing a small portion of that lot right now. But since the legal description includes the whole lot, so that funding conditions still apply.
Okay, that's really important information. Thanks. I'll be sure to share that in the bigger group. And that would be putting the permanent covenants on, and then what was the other thing you said?
Site drainage plan and erosion and sedimentation.
Okay. Yeah, there are a number of different things that have specific timing requirements, like how long a certain survey is good for before you might have to redo it. So to address one of the earlier questions about if you had applied for the 9% round last year for a project and it didn't get funded and you're coming back in, please pay attention to those things that are in the manual that say you might have to redo it, because not everything might have to be redone, depending on whether anything has changed on the site since when you applied last time or the last time you might have done a study for it. And some things will. Some things have an expiration regardless if anything has changed, and some things you might only have to change if you have something changing on site, or even a neighboring property might have changed. The use of a neighboring property can sometimes affect what your submission is. Even if nothing's changed on your site, but something gets built nearby, then we may need you to redo some of the testing. Okay, so it looks like we only have a few more minutes left. So so I have a feeling that there's not going to be any burning questions coming in the last minute, but if there are, we'll stay till 12:30 and then I'll let you all go. Maybe this would be a good time to think through some of our process too. After the applications are due, when do you, Sanjana, this is probably a question for you more than anyone. When do we expect to be getting clarifications out to folks to clarify things if there's any issues we have or confusion that we have when we're reading their documents?
I would say probably after a month, because we don't start reviewing the applications like even after 2 weeks after we get the applications, because it takes some time to sort out the applications, and then Stephen uploads all the reviews app on the SharePoint and everything. But yeah, as soon as we start reviewing the applications, we just note down all the clarifications and then start sending out the clarifications. So I would say about a month.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said before, like if something is missing after the application is submitted, we cannot do anything about it. We cannot accept new documents. That is against the QAP policy. So even if you submit a new document with the clarification and you clarify everything, like we would still count that as an incomplete document. So just please be careful about that.
Yeah, and please reach out to us too. We can answer questions about that sort of thing before the application. If you're confused, or if this is your first time doing this, of course, definitely reach out because it is a lot.
And it's really easy to miss a document or to miss, like, because we have so many documents requirements for environmental, especially. So you can miss one document easily. So yeah, just be careful.
And would you group that in with missing signatures too? Or, yeah.
Because without a signature, that is not an executed document, like we cannot accept that.
Right.
We hate that, but we still have to count that as an incomplete document.
It's always a challenge for us to weigh fairness versus what we know the intent of the person might have been, but then not really being able to do much about it, because if you're missing a document,
we have to be consistent in our review process and be fair to other applications. So.
Okay, well, it is 12:30, and I really I'm happy that you all joined this chat. I hope this was helpful to you. We'll cover. I'll try to summarize some of these with the time we have in the big group. And if anything comes up after this and you need to reach out, feel free. Not sure if we can answer all your questions because we're in kind of a blackout period as far as giving guidance for scoring, but certainly when it comes to forms, the manual, anything like that, I'm sure we can answer your questions. So please reach out, and we look forward to getting your applications and being able to build good affordable housing with you all. So we'll see you in about 15 minutes. Bye-bye.
Bye.